Hey guys, I've got a special ruling video today. If its purpose doesn't make sense to you now, it may soon, but for now just know that these are some important rulings I'm covering as a level 1 judge in Australia. First up, costs and targeting cards in the break zone. So if you activate a summon, special or action ability which targets, you choose your target before the cost is paid. Auto abilities on the other hand don't have a cost. Many auto abilities trigger when a character is played. We often refer to them as enter abilities, but that's just for ease of understanding. That has no ruling significance. They are just regular auto abilities. So when you play a forward like Lena, for example, you first play the character from your hand, paying its cost, CP cost, top left corner. Then its auto ability triggers as a separate event, which means whatever you discarded for Lena's cost is already in the break zone when an auto ability triggers, which means you can choose the character that you discarded to play Lena. You can choose that with her auto ability because her auto ability is a separate event to playing the card Lena. However, her special Arise, it chooses a forward in the break zone and also has that cost, so you can't choose a target that you discard for that cost. So you wouldn't be able to discard a knight, for example, as 2 of the water CP for Arise and revive that knight with the same activation of that special ability, because the cost and the target happen essentially simultaneously, but in the actual procedure the target happens before the cost is paid. Now, multiple targets. To add a summon or an ability to the stack which has targets, you must choose a full set of legal targets. Now, when it tries to resolve, however, if all of the targets you chose are now illegal, the summon or ability fizzles, so doesn't resolve at all. If at least one target is still legal though, then the summon or ability will resolve as much as possible. So it will still affect the other targets that are still legal, and any other effects it might have will also still happen, as long as at least one target is still legal. So targets can become illegal in multiple ways. The most common way is the character leaves play before the summon resolves. But it could also become untargetable through other effects. This is different to Yu-Gi-Oh! For anyone who comes from Yu-Gi-Oh! Making a card untargetable after it's already been targeted will actually make it an illegal target when that targeting effect tries to resolve. And the other common way is that it might have its state changed. So, for example, you target a dull forward with Mustadio and it gets activated in response, then it's no longer dull. So that's another way for it to become an illegal target. But, so say we've got Leviathan, you target one forward on both sides of the field. If your opponent tries to remove your forward in response to try and counter the Leviathan, that actually won't work. Their forward will still bounce, because even though one of the targets is illegal, the one that you chose on your field, the other target is still legal, so Leviathan will resolve as much as possible and affect the target that's still legal. So their forward will still bounce, even if your forward gets removed in response. Now, priority. This chart can be confusing at first. You don't have to worry about understanding it in full right now. I will actually go over it in a later video in detail, and it's not actually as complicated as it looks. But all you have to look at right now is that on the left-hand side in blue is when turn player has priority. On the right-hand side in red is when the non-turn player has priority. And the purple arrows are when that player activates an action or special ability or activates a summon. Now, what you'll notice is that all these purple arrows, they all stay on the same side of the chart. So as long as a player, even if a player activates an ability or a summon, they keep priority. In fact, priority doesn't change between the players except when a player passes priority. So the only way to get from one side of the chart to the other is with these yellow arrows, which is passing priority. So that's actually voluntarily giving up your priority. If you don't do that, if you hold priority, you can keep adding things to the stack until you're done. So that's basically all we need to look at here right now. Moving on, I will come back to this chart for another couple of things soon. EX bursts. When you reveal a card with EX in the damage zone, you have the option to trigger it. That includes taking player damage as well as damage from card effects too. So sorry, it can't only trigger from taking player damage from attacking forward. It can also trigger from damage by your own effects, like Fusoya, for example. The only one that doesn't is Cactuar, because it specifically says that it doesn't allow you to trigger EX bursts. If you choose to trigger the EX, it still follows the same rules as the effect normally would. Like, you have to choose a full set of legal targets still, so you would still have to have a forward in play to use Belias and draw the card. or you could target your opponents as well, but yeah, as long as there has to be a legal target for you to trigger it. And of course, the main thing with the X's is they resolve immediately. They don't use the stack, so neither player can respond to an EX or use the stack until the EX has resolved. Now, removing from the game versus costs. Field abilities are constantly active, and they're applied even during times that players can't usually interact, such as during procedures, like paying a cost, or while EXs are resolving. So this includes field abilities that include some kind of option, like Annuo, where you have the option to remove things from play. Because it's a field ability, you can still apply that during these times that you normally can't do other things. Now, many characters, especially backups, have an action ability that includes sending itself to the break zone. So, because a field ability can be applied during that procedure, Annuo's first ability, his field ability, can remove the character that's sacrificing itself, essentially. I use the word sacrifice because that makes it easy to understand, but when a character sacrifices itself for its own cost, Annuo can remove that character, so it goes removed from the game instead of the break zone. However, that doesn't stop the ability. It may seem misleading from the text, but even though Annuo can remove it, it doesn't prevent the ability activating or resolving normally. The ability actually doesn't care where it ends up, as long as it self-sacrificed the card. But that one catches a few people off, especially, again, like a game like Yu-Gi-Oh! You actually, Macrocosmos is up, you are not allowed to activate effects that put to the graveyard as a cost, because you can't send it there. Final Fantasy is not like that. As long as you've attempted to pay the cost, it doesn't care where the card as part of the cost ends up. Simultaneous auto abilities. So when more than one auto ability triggers at the same time, this is what the bottom text here says. If multiple auto abilities trigger at the same time, add turn players to the stack first, in an order of their choosing, then opponents, in an order of their choosing. So if we take this chart and take it in block step, for example, so player A has attacked with a forward, and now we're in block step, player B has declared a blocker, and this forward has an ability when it's blocked, but also the defending player's forward has an ability when it blocks. So both these forwards on opposite sides of the field trigger their auto ability at the same time. So turn player, the attacker, is going to go on the stack first, and then the opponent, or the other non-turn player, their blocker's ability is going to go on the stack second, which means it's above on the stack. So the blocker's auto ability will actually resolve first, then the attacker's auto ability will resolve. Okay. The things that happen at activation, not resolution. There's actually only 4 things in the game that happen at activation when you add something to the stack, rather than a resolution when it resolves off the stack. So they are paying a cost, choosing targets, selecting effect options, some people call them modes, so that's for cards like Seador or Glacial Lebolus, where you select from some options. That happens at activation as well. And this is the tricky one, is not very clear and there's not many cards like it, but if the same kind of targets are affected differently, then you decide how to apply the effect to which targets. So in the case of Palom, as this example, it's choose up to 3 forwards, deal 1 6,000, 1 4,000, and 1 2,000. You have to decide which of the 3 forwards you're dealing 6,000, 4,000, and 2,000 to at activation, because they're the same kind of targets, but they're being affected differently. So you have to choose which one is which at activation, not resolution. It's a little bit misleading again. The period after choose up 3 forwards opponent controls might make you think that that's done, all the stuff activation is done. But no, the periods don't have any ruling significance. You have to actually read the whole effect and see that it involves this this application of different effects to different targets. And you have to know that you have to choose those at activation. And in the case of dividing damage among targets, you have to apply at least 1,000 damage to each target. You cannot apply 0 to a target. Now, party attacking. You can party attack with as many forwards as you like, as long as they're all the same element. So in this case, if you make your Mime Wind at the start of the battle phase, you could attack with all 3 of these. First Strike will only affect damage calculation if every single forward in the party has it. If even just one party in the forward in the party doesn't have First Strike at damage calculation, then no First Strike will apply at all. However, all other abilities work the same as usual, including the other keywords. So a brave forward as part of a party will still stay active when it attacks, even though the other party members will probably dull. A haste forward can participate in a party with other forwards that don't have haste, as long as they can attack that turn. On attack effects still happen, on block, all that kind of stuff, when this deals damage, etc. If they don't get blocked and hit the player, then as long as at least one of those forwards can deal damage, then one player damage is dealt. Exactly one damage is dealt, no matter how many forwards in the party, as long as at least one of them can deal damage. The last thing, if a forward can block at least one member of the party, then that forward can block the entire party. So this is for effects when you've got parties with unblockable effects involved in them, things like Lan, Zidane, Yuffie, those kind of effects. You know, mixing and matching some of those might get a bit confusing. So just think about it. If your forward can block one of the forwards in the party, it can block that party. Field abilities. Field abilities is just a quick one. Field abilities don't use the stack. That's straightforward. Backups being able to produce CP is a rule mechanic. It's not a field ability. All the current keywords that exist in the game are all field abilities. That's haste, first strike, brave, back attack. End phase. Now, during the end phase, neither player can activate a summon or an action special ability. However, auto abilities can still trigger, including delayed auto abilities. And priority is still assigned, but it's kind of just a formality, because it to initiate rules processes, which is stuff like lose the game if you have 7 damage, or like your forwards die if they have damage higher than their power, etc. Those are rule processes, and they trigger when priority would be assigned. So that's why we still assign priority in the end phase, even though you can't actually do anything with it, essentially. So yeah, auto abilities still trigger and resolve in the end phase like normal, but neither player can respond with anything. Now, costs. The cost of an action or a special ability is everything before the colon and nothing after. So, using Vermilion Bird as an example, the cost is S, which is discard a card with that name, 2 fire CP, a dull symbol, which means you have to dull this card, and also put 5 backups into the break zone. All of that is before the colon, so all of that is part of the cost. That you have to do all of that just to add this effect to the stack. The cost of a summon is only its CP cost, unless the text specifically states that it affects the cost. So you can see in Ultima and Zodiac as the other example, it says if you control that forward, the cost to cast it is reduced. So that is specifically referencing the cost. So that is part of the cost. However, anything else in the text, if it doesn't say anything about the cost, then it does not affect the cost, and the cost is just the CP number in the top left corner. Trying to put illegal characters into play. So, Hildebrand's Mandeville Dance. What happens if you reveal a forward that you can't put into play? For example, another Hildebrand. In the case that a forward would try to enter play, but is illegal to be in play, it just stays in the same zone that it's in. So, in this case, with Hildebrand, if you revealed a Hildebrand with his effect, it would just stay on top of the deck. If you revealed, say, a dark character, and you already control a light character, then that dark character will just stay on top of the deck. Losing abilities. So, once an ability is on the stack, it's inherently independent of its source. So that means once it's activated, it'll resolve regardless what happens to the character that activated it. In the meantime, sorry, between its activation and resolution. So even if you remove a character's abilities in response to its action ability, like with Dancer, for example, the action ability will still resolve normally because it was already activated. Removing that forward's abilities doesn't actually affect the resolution of the ability. Now, power. There's a lot of things about power, and again, I'll do a later video detailing this a lot more. But basically, to find a forward's current power, you've got its base power or printed power, which is the number in the bottom right hand corner, and then buffs and debuffs and things affecting it, right? So in this case, so we have a guy. There's like a field ability that's giving it 1000 power from Manic Crow. It's got a couple of abilities that have got temporary buff or debuff on it. So it's got Monk for plus 2000, it's neg 4000 Black Mage. Simple to find its final power. You just take its base power, apply all of those cumulatively, and you get the final value of 7000. So that's pretty straightforward, right? It's just It's just basic maths, basic addition and subtraction. So that's pretty easy. However, some power effects set power to a specific value. This is where it gets a little bit more confusing, but it's actually still really simple if you understand what's going on. When something sets a forward's power to a certain value, it actually changes the base power. So if Barbarisha gets added into the equation here, Barbarisha targets Guy, Barbarisha sets his power to 1000, that just changes his base power. So now, you've still got all these effects applying, you just replace that base power value with the new value that has been set to, and then do the math just like that again. It's just addition, subtraction again on top of that, you're just changing a different number. And so you can basically treat that as changing the number in the bottom right hand corner of the card. So yeah, that's in this case Guy would break because he's neg 1000 power. Well, sorry, he wouldn't even break, he would just be sent to the break zone because he's lower than 0 power. Just remember that you apply the passive, so to speak, buffs and debuffs on top of the set power value. Special abilities. Special abilities are named abilities with an S icon in the cost. That S just means discard a card with the same name. It doesn't have to be the same version or set ID. Also note that discarding the character only contributes that S part of the cost. It doesn't generate the 2 CP you would normally get from discarding a card. So in the case of Omni Slash, for example, you would discarding you have to discard a cloud in addition to generating 3 CP in some other way, as well as dulling him. Now, special abilities are not action abilities, although they function exactly the same. The only difference is like the name, and so some effects specifically reference one or the other, like Green Mage, for example, can only cancel an action ability, not a special ability. And separate special abilities on the same card are not inherently linked. So just because Cloud has 2 different special abilities doesn't mean you could say discard one Cloud to use both or something like that. They're still just separate abilities. You would have to pay for them separately. Of course, in Cloud's case, if you wanted to use both, you would also have to activate him somehow in between because both of those abilities require dulling him as a cost. So yeah. The last thing I want to go through is damage modifiers. Now, sometimes when a forward takes damage, there are effects which change the amount of damage being dealt. They're a common example of replacement effects, which is an effect that sees an event that's about to happen and changes it in some way and then does something instead. So they use the word instead to signify that the original event actually never happens. So in this case, if you look at the damage, so Ninja uses his action ability. Now, when he would deal damage to a forward, instead of dealing the 3000, he will do 6000. So the event has been replaced. It never deals the 3000. It deals 6000 instead, which means that Larsa, for example, if he battles Larsa, he's got 5000 power. His ability prevents damage that's less than his power. However, Ninja's dealing 6000, which is greater than 5000. So Ninja will still break Larsa in combat because he's dealing 6000 combat damage. He's not dealing 3000 then doubling it. Because it's a replacement effect, damage modifiers all do this. They all replace the damage being dealt with the different value. Also, one more thing to note, everything else about the event stays the same. So, just because the value has changed doesn't mean that it's now an ability dealing the damage or anything like that. It's still just Ninja dealing combat damage. Everything's the same, just the value was changed. That's the bit that was replaced. Everything else stays the same. But yeah, those are some suspiciously specific rules that I think you would like to know. Many of you might want to know those soon in the future. I hope that, I know that's a little bit cryptic, but I hope this has helped a little bit. Even if you don't need to know any of these specifically, I just hope it's like helped. There's some general knowledge, things like that. Yeah, thanks for watching. Cheers.